Hello, Barry.
How you doing, Nick?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time tonight. I really appreciate it. Just bear with me while I click my right screen there and focus on you. Yeah, how are you doing? How's your day been?
Good, good. Can't quite remember what I did today. Probably what I've done other days. Been a lot of stuff online
It's a
and
bit like that at the moment, isn't it?
kind of living online. Yeah.
Have you had dinner tonight?
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. In fact, I cooked.
Oh, very
So,
nice.
yeah, yeah.
Would you cook? I cooked as well, actually. It was a curry that didn't turn out so well.
I'm usually a vegetarian, but I cooked some fish tonight. Did
Oh, very
a
nice.
whole snapper, which
Oh,
was
very nice. Caught it
yeah.
yourself?
Hey?
You caught it, catch it yourself?
I would love to say that I had, but no.
Hey, well, I'll just quickly introduce you a little bit, Barry, and then I'll hand over you to say a bit more about yourself. Yeah, Barry Coates is the founder of Mindful Money, which is an organisation that helps people understand where their KiwiSaver is invested and helps them invest in more ethical and yeah, environmentally responsible funds and investments. He's going to talk to us about that a bit more tonight. He's also a former member of Parliament, former member of the Green Party. Well, you're still a member of the Green Party?
Still a member of the Green Party, but not quite as active as I
Not quite as
was.
active. Keen to also talk to you a little bit about that tonight. And Barry and I first met, it would have been last year, I think, Barry, about this time probably last year. I was helping a guy by the name of Nick Jack, who might be listening in, to look into setting up a impact fund, an impact investment fund. We'll talk a bit more about the different terms and stuff that are used in the investment world. A lot of it was very new to me. And yeah, we met with you at Auckland Cafe and just talked a bit about the world of impact investing. So yeah, I've been following Mindful Money very closely over the last, what's it been, 6 months since you launched?
Coming up to 9.
9 months.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
went to the launch party and yeah, I've been very, well, trying to be very proactive in terms of promoting it throughout the various social media channels because I just think it's so important. I guess for me, learning about investment, it was always quite scary, I guess, and a bit obtuse to me, kind of trying to understand all the language and stuff around investment, which I then grew to learn. Sometimes that seems to be a bit of a ploy, I think, in the financial world. But I also learned that, I was doing all these very tangible things in my life around plastics was my, that was my gateway drug was, plastic, single-use plastics. And that was into kind of being more mindful and aware of the impacts I was having as an individual. And then, of course, driving car, walking more, eating a lot less meat, especially red meat. Yeah, changing my diet, buying things secondhand. All of these steps I was taking and feeling quite, I guess, virtuous about it. But then learning that my KiwiSaver was almost certainly funding more burning of fossil fuels and who knows what other terrible things around landmines and ammunition and I don't know, tobacco and all other sorts of things that, well, it's a lot of it's, I think, personal, what your values are, but it was invested in things that didn't match my values and principles. And that was quite a shock to kind of learn about that. So yeah, that was kind of my step, I guess, into the investment world and stuff. But hey, that's sort of my intro, and I'd really like you now just to sort of touch on a little bit more about you, the role you do at Mindful Money, and a bit more about what it is, and sort of fill in some of the gaps that I've left there.
Sure. So, kia ora, mihi nui kia koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. I sort of, as befits somebody who's really old, I've got a really long CV, so I'm not going to talk about it. But I started off like doing some work on economics at university and went to Yale University and did a degree in Masters in Finance and Management, and then had worked for a while in the corporate world and had a bit of a conversion to the environment. I'd always been kind of an environmentalist, but I really kind of got it in the early 1990s. Worked for a number of years in the UK around environment, globalization kind of issues. in various capacities, and came back to New Zealand to head Oxfam for 11 years. And set up a sustainability program at the Auckland Business School, University Business School. So, and then briefly in Parliament and Mindful Money. So
wow,
the whole,
not a bad CV, Barry.
It's a weird CV. It's all over the place, isn't it?
Oh,
but the whole thing for Mindful Money for me was cycling back to my work in the UK after the US Summit and saying that if we're going to take action on sustainability, then actually we have to look at the most powerful ways that we can act. And typically, that's not just kind of going vegetarian or not flying so much or being lighter with our footprint. It's actually some stuff like, where does our money go? Because even if you haven't got a massive amount of savings, the way you use and channel your money has a huge impact. And for most people, they don't really think about the impact of their KiwiSaver, for example. So many people don't even know which KiwiSaver they're in.
Yeah.
But if they do, they're primarily being told vaguely, oh yeah, it's a responsible fund or an ethical fund, but they don't inquire as to exactly what's invested in. And there's a lot of how should I say, you use the term that it's almost like they're hiding things in the finance world by making it so impenetrable and so difficult for you to access that you can't really get a hold on. So what's really my money doing? What am I invested in? And so that was the impetus for Mindful Money. We wanted to do the radical transparency. We wanted to say to people, you can find out, you need to find out where your money goes. As an investor, it's your money.
Yeah.
You want to control it. If you don't control it, somebody else is going to take your money and use it for bad stuff. Use it for exploitation or pollution or, climate wrecking behavior. So what we did was we basically tracked all of the KiwiSaver investments, 270 funds, and we took them apart and we said, these are the direct investments they have, and these are the funds that they invest in. So we unpacked all of those funds, and we related those then to issues that the public would be concerned about. And we defined those based on a public survey done for us by Comma Brinton and jointly with another organisation called Responsible Investment Association of Australasia. And we did it, and that defined for us 10 issues that the public are really concerned about. So there's the usual one: fossil fuels, weapons, gambling, pornography, tobacco, alcohol, GMOs, palm oil, plus human rights violations and animal welfare issues. And those 10 issues were basically the things that we said, well, at least the public ought to know how much of their money is going into those 10 things. So we did all the research, took a long time to do.
I just
Our
want
team
to...
is 17 volunteers.
Wow.
We're a charity, so we primarily live off of volunteers and donations. So we tracked all of this, got all the data all organized, set up the website, and now it's free, simple, easy for people to go to. And it really is it's a way to democratize finance.
Yes. I just wanted to underline the amount of work that was involved in that. I think you kind of skimmed over it a little bit. Like, was it 270 different funds, did you say?
270 funds. We're at the moment now moving just from KiwiSaver into all other managed funds available in New Zealand as well. So that's another 445 funds in addition to the 270.
Can you give an average or a guesstimate of how many individual businesses, each fund would invest into?
Oh, probably 2,000 or 3,000.
That's mind-blowing. And that kind of blew my mind when I started learning about this a lot more, is that it's all about spreading the risk, isn't it? And so they invest in, lots and lots of different companies. And a little bit of that depends, isn't it, too, on your criteria if you choose risky or conservative or somewhere. But I didn't realize how many different individual businesses each fund invests into. And I think it was after meeting you or Mindful Money at some point anyway, I woke to it and looked into my KiwiSaver at the time. And it was just screeds and screeds and screeds of businesses. And sure enough, fossil fuel companies, ammunitions companies, chemical companies, all this stuff. And I was just like, yeah, quite shocked and quite flabbergasted how many of these businesses that I am spending so much of my time trying to give people, I guess, inspiration and ideas and creativity around different ways and different solutions. And here I am supporting them all.
And the thing is, Nick, that you know, a lot of these funds say, oh, yeah, we're ethical. And you look at the companies that they invest in. And, you know, it's the usual ones like ExxonMobil that, you know, spends hundreds of millions of dollars trying to deny climate change. And so you know, those are the things that it's if the information is free and easy and available to people, in a way, why wouldn't you look at it? So then we make it easy for people to switch into an ethical fund. And when they do so, the ethical funds that we've identified that meet our minimum criteria then give us a small contribution towards our ongoing costs. So you know, doesn't quite pay the bills yet. Maybe one day I'll be able to get paid a salary, but it's, COVID-19 hasn't exactly helped.
No, I bet not. Well, because I did it. I went through the Mindful Money tool and had the experience, and I wanted to say to you too, like, because I know it's so challenging to try. Just, I guess I wanted to sort of set that scene a little bit of how complex it is from your position, and trying to give that transparency to people. But then when I went into it, I went through, put my what my principles or my values were, and it spit out the one for me, which I'm going to forget now which one it is. Oh, Booster. It was a Booster one. And then I went into Booster, and then it was like, where do you want to split your money, and blah, blah, blah. And by the time I sort of got to there, I was like, oh, half in that. I can't remember which ones I went into now. I'm about to check. But I went half in growth and half in conservative, I think I went. And I was kind of like, oh, I'm drained. I'm really drained, kind of like looking through all this, sort of trying to get it. And I'm someone who's quite, I'd say, engaged or quite woke to all this. But is that a real ongoing challenge for you and Mindful Money and others in this impact and ethical investing world to try and simplify down a really quite complex, or intricate might be the better word, sort of scenario or situation?
So, you know, we said we did a survey of New Zealanders and their attitude towards ethical investing. 83% of people want to do it, but only about 8% do it proactively. And so we asked about the gap. So, you know, what are the barriers? What are the difficulties of you doing this? And the dominant answer that came back is, I haven't got time to do the research and compare the options.
Yes.
There isn't enough independent and objective information available. And I'm not sure there are credible funds out there that I can invest in. And so, in a way, those were kind of the guiding principles that we formed Mindful Money on. And because we've done all this research, we hope to make it so much easier for people so they don't have to do it all themselves. And, you know, before starting up Mindful Money, you know, I kept on running across people who said, you know, I've got a PhD in finance, and I tried to sort out which ethical fund to invest in, and I gave up after a week. And so it isn't easy. And so one of the reasons that we set up Mindful Money is to make it as easy as possible. And there are always ways you can make it much more complex. But actually, in terms of the basic decision making, it's not too difficult, not too, you know, it's quite straightforward. And a lot of people say, I've come on to Mindful Money, I've gone through the options, I know what's ahead of me, and it took me 10 minutes, 15 minutes to change my KiwiSaver, and I've been meaning to do it for you know, the last 10 years. It makes it a whole lot more possible.
Yeah, that was one thing that really stood out for me, was that sense of satisfaction, I guess, or of relief maybe that I had finally done it, because my learning journey was totally being unaware. KiwiSaver, whatever, it's money ticking over there. It's not even my money, but so crucial, that point that you said at the start, it's your money, right? And you need to take ownership of where it's invested. Anyway, I wasn't really thinking about it over there. Someone else is looking after it, and then starting to learn about the investments that were getting made, and I was like, surely my money's not part of that, you know. And then I looked into it, and sure enough, all these companies that I think are doing the wrong thing. And then that it still took me time to, I don't know, weeks to months to then actually go in and do it. And I don't know how I would have done it without Mindful Money, to be honest. I don't know.
Thank you,
yeah, well, I don't know what the approach would have been. Because if you spent what did you say at the start, with 17 volunteers, it took you how long?
From Woe to Go took us about a year.
So
but some of that was the early design principles as to how we were going to do what we wanted to do, rather than the programming itself. Right. Probably the programming itself, more like 6 months.
Right. Wow. Yeah, and all the research though as well, right? On top of that, like that's it's just too hard for one person. And so coming back to Mindful Money's approach here, are there things that you are doing, things that you have learned around how to engage more people, how to get more people, from that 80% you said over to that 8% in terms of wants to be in more ethical funds and actually doing it?
Finance decisions are inherently difficult for people, and as a society, our financial literacy is relatively low. We don't get taught about it much, and it's sometimes not the subject of conversation. So, I think it's improving, but traditionally, people haven't really felt comfortable in financial decisions. So what we find is that people often have to come to the website, look at it, think about it, go away again, talk to their partner, come back, etc. What we often find is that the people then, when they come back, they go directly to the provider that they've chosen, and so we don't get any commission for this Mindful Money. But that's all right, because we're a charity, and it means it'll be a bit longer till I get paid. But it's as a charitable aim, we want to shift money so that it does good rather than does harm. And so I guess what we find for people is when most people get it, and they do what you did and had a look at what they're invested in and the better options, then actually at that stage, most people want to change. It's kind of, why wouldn't you? And particularly that one thing that most people don't realize, they're used to when they go shopping, if they have an organic option or an ethical option, it costs more. And they think that probably the same thing applies to ethical investing. It doesn't. In fact, it's the opposite. And in fact, most of the research says that if you invest ethically, you get returns that are as high, if not higher, and with lower risk than conventional investing. And the reason is because ethical companies tend to be well-managed companies. All of the companies that we admire in New Zealand, if you think about, they're all companies that take sustainability seriously. They've got loyal customers. They've got a strong brand. They've got motivated employees who are treated well. They don't get sued for environmental liability. So a whole raft of reasons as to why more sustainable or more ethical companies do better. And it's also kind of, if you're like an economic theorist, it's because these people who run Wall Street have no idea about the environment and the economy, and they're underpriced sustainability. So, that's the kind of the economist argument.
Well, that's it, right? You touched a few things I want to unpick there. Just that last bit, though, I guess a realization for me on my kind of learning journey a bit too is that the economy and this economic system that we've inherited was made up. Bunch of mostly blokes, probably white blokes, especially neoliberalism, brought it to the world, a couple of decades ago, and they knew nothing about climate change, knew nothing about the carbon cycle, or probably anything about mycorrhizal fungi or soil health or ecology. They knew nothing about the real world, right? And they literally made up this economic system, and it's in direct conflict with how the real world functions and all the systems that govern life. It is directly in conflict with that, and that's been really quite I don't know, but it's really guiding me a bit at the moment. I think like it just, we can change the economic system. We can, it's been made up to this standard. We can evolve it again into another one. We can't change how the real world works. We can't change the way the world's spinning, or the force of gravity, or the speed of light, or the carbon cycle. That's reality. That's forever there. This economic system, we can totally rewrite it to work in harmony.
We can, although the thing that sort of really I think we have to remember is that the relationship between an economic system and a system of power and privilege is kind of, they are part of the same thing. Right. So, as I said, in 1991 and 92, I was living in the UK and working on climate change and, sustainability. So we signed an agreement, a convention on climate change in 1992, and nothing was done. In fact, the number of people who agreed that there was a threat from climate change was higher in the United States then than it is now. So why not? It's not just a question of awareness. It wasn't just that people didn't go to Al Gore's film An Inconvenient Truth, and figure out that the climate change thing is real. It's because there are very powerful corporate lobbyists and powerful people who managed to influence public opinion and who managed to block progress, and it still happens. So that actually, we can't imagine it's just a question of benign changes. In order to get change, actually, there are things you have to do to make a democracy work like a democracy. You have to actually be strategic, to form a movement, and to sort of manage change processes in a very deliberate way. And it's the way our opponents do it. They put billions of dollars into changing the system in ways that suits them.
And all that PR stuff.
Like that. If we're going to actually have a system that serves people and serves the environment and doesn't destroy our climate, then actually that's a long-term project that we need to collaborate on and do very powerfully.
Have you got any sense of a timeline there? And the reason I asked, I was literally on LinkedIn earlier before we started talking, and I saw someone put something up about the European Green New Deal, I think it is, or European Green Deal, and they were saying 25 years, kind of like a generation to get the kind of change that we need, because we're so ingrained in this linear, extractive, exploitive system that we've inherited, that to transition over is about 25 years, by 2050 they were sort of saying. Have you got any sense of, because there's the kind of the science saying how quickly we need to change. We've got the IPCC climate change committee saying we need to halve our emissions in, what is it now, 9 years or 10 years. So there's that science, but have you got a sense of how quickly or slowly you think it might transition?
My view of sort of climate science is not so much linear process of change, but tipping points and sudden times at which the climate system is liable to go awry and cause very, very serious problems. And when that happens, you can get very, very quick responses from human beings. And, we already saw with the bushfires that in Australia, that actually it had a pretty profound effect. And suddenly everyone was out there wanting to invest ethically. And the time that it really hit home to people in New Zealand was when we could smell the smoke in the air from Australian bushfires. And suddenly people started waking up and thinking, oh my God, this is real. This is really happening. And I think when we have moments like that, and in a way when you have moments like COVID-19 crisis, that people's behavior can change remarkably quickly. And economies can change remarkably quickly when cost structures change. So now that solar and solar photovoltaic is becoming cheaper and cheaper every year, it's now kind of cost competitive or often lower cost. than other forms of electricity generation. We're starting to see electric cars come down in price quite dramatically. These changes, I think, will surprise everybody.
Okay.
How quickly they could come.
Yep.
If we generate the political will for that to happen. So
Yeah.
I don't think we need to say, oh, it's going to take us 25 years or it's going to take this amount of time. If things start changing, if we start meeting a few of these crises, and if people's consciousness starts to change on this stuff, then actually most of the things that we need to change are changeable quite quickly. You have to rebuild infrastructure, and there's some long-term decisions to be made, but actually there's a lot of stuff that can change very, very quickly.
Do you have an opinion, and this kind of bit of a segue into your political experience, do you have a sense that business or government should, I don't know, lead the way or can make the biggest change? So for me, just to phrase that question a bit, I see that, government kind of seem to react to the popular, and the populace, what everyone, what the public wanted. And as Mike Joy said, who he spoke to a couple of weeks back, you kind of need to give the government a mandate. And he sort of used the freshwater example. He probably doesn't get enough credit for the kind of work he did to make freshwater become such a conversation, nationally. And then it became such a government, election issue last election. But yeah, do you have a sense that it needs to be led by business and business people, or politics and politicians, or the general public, or is it kind of everyone together? Yeah, have you got?
So from my experience, the change happens when you bring together the different actors and the different stakeholders in a way that pulls us together. I mean, Mike's done fabulous work on freshwater. So have, so many other good civil society organizations, Forest and Bird and the EDF and Greenpeace, and, so you kind of WWF and
just to his credit, sorry, he was quick to acknowledge that as well.
Yeah. No, I know. And I sincerely mean that he's been a real leader. He's been fantastic. And the Green Party's campaigned for, clean rivers, swimmable rivers for a long time. So it's all of that is, you're exactly right, shapes public opinion and gives the mandate and the permission for governments then to be able to change. And it gives the incentives for corporations to be able to build businesses based on those kind of advantages. So I think actually, in terms of the crucial actor in the situation, it's often civil society that leads these change processes. And yes, it's great when business kind of cooperates and partners with civil society and is out there. From my experience, it's very rarely business-led. It's generally civil society-led and attracting business to come along, because that's where the people are going. And that's where the movement is going, and that's where the consumers are going, and that's where their demand will go, and that's where eventually governments will go.
Yes. It's really interesting in our space, being sustainability consultants. We get to go into lots of different businesses and see a lot of new stuff happening. And there's this constant tension for businesses to try and be leading and create change. And there's so many amazing people in New Zealand who are, putting their lives on the line, might be a bit drastic, but they really are investing their money and their livelihoods into trying to create solutions through their businesses that can help create this far better future that we talk about. And yet they've got that tension of not going too soon, that they're seen as crazy or way out there or hippies or loonies or whatever. And then also that tension of trying to bring their customers with them. It's a really interesting kind of dynamic that we constantly have to help them kind of work through and how they communicate it as well, and use the right language. And I think this goes across kind of the wider sustainability conversation, and also in the investment. We talked a bit about the language at the start, but trying to take things that can be quite complex and complicated, and like climate change is kind of simple but kind of complex for a lot of people, and then trying to bring that down into really simple terms that they get it, but they also are educated, if that's making sense, because it can be, yeah, I mean, even just, let's take the climate change example for one thing, and talking about greenhouse gases, and then learning that, carbon stays in the atmosphere for hundreds or thousands of years, whereas methane stays up there for more like, a few decades, and then turns into carbon dioxide, and there's all these different kind of intricacies to it, right? Or on top of that as well, there's the whole, what do they call it with, with the airplanes up higher? I forget the term now, but releasing the gases at a higher level has a bigger impact as well. So there are lots of complexities. You're trying to bring it down into language that a consumer can kind of, I hate using that word consumer, the people can interpret as they're going about their busy lives, making their investing decisions or making their purchasing decisions. It's it's an ongoing battle, the taking the complex and bringing it down into simple kind of terms that your customers can understand.
Yeah.
We've been chatting with Tyler. I haven't even got to the key questions that I was going to ask you. So we've kind of done some of this stuff, but one of the questions I want to put to you, in 10 seconds, how would you describe our current economic system? Go.
The system is set up to destroy our environment and our climate and leave too many people behind. Yes to a market system, but no to a market society.
Good. I think that was 10.1 seconds. Very good.
100 meters. Yeah,
it was. I sort of say, in terms of taking the complex down to simple, for me, I try and use that vision of linear, and that helps me a lot for people to understand that we extract resources, make products, use them or own them, this real sense of ownership, and then we dump them. And we're piling up the pollution, and we're running out of resources and destroying more ecosystems to try and get them, and exploiting people along the way.
It was longer than 10 seconds.
It was. Okay, so if you could start a business tomorrow, what would it be and why?
Mindful money.
That pays your salary.
Because I really do believe this stuff. That actually, I just make a little bit more money out of it than I am at the moment. But the idea is I think right, that if you want to change the world, you got to change the core economic levers, and that means changing the way money flows and the way investments get made. Because if you change that, then actually a lot of other things will follow. So really, I think it is one of these intervention points that is really important. So, for many corporations, they would love to do more on environment and sustainability, but they've got a board of directors sitting there saying, hey, our asses are on the line if we don't make shareholders a whole lot of dividends this 3 months, dividend, and we'll get kicked out, and we'll kick you out if you don't do this. So actually in the system, finance and the kind of the power of money plays an enormous role in the system, and so that's in a way what we have to take back. We have to take back that control and say, actually, instead of just working for a kind of a higher return on your money, actually you've got to understand the impact of what your investment does and take responsibility for that.
Totally agree. Okay, my next question. If you could go back in history and change one political, cultural, or economic decision, either globally or here in New Zealand, what would it be?
You remember I said, a kind of a conversion on the road to Damascus for me was the US Summit in 1992, the biggest conference that had ever been held in the world at that time. And there was a bargain on the table. And the bargain on the table was the rich countries of the developed world wanted to do something on the environment and climate change. The poorer countries said, yes, but actually we need some money in order to be able to solve our problems of poverty and hunger and starvation. And there was a deal on the table that said, okay, let's get together and let's work on both the environmental and development issues, which is where the concept of sustainable development came from, in a partnership. And George W. Bush stood up and said, the American way of life is not up for negotiation. And that was echoed by some other politicians, and for the gross failure of leadership, that opportunity in 1992 to do some stuff differently was not taken.
Yeah,
I think it was, really think that was a massive lost opportunity.
It's crazy for me just to try and comprehend. It was in 1992. So I was 8 then, and I've been in this space for 5, 6 years and trying so hard, and you kind of feel like it's a new thing, but it's not. A great book for anybody who's interested in sort of getting into sustainability, the history of sustainability. Can't remember who wrote it, but just it goes back decades, if not centuries. And you can probably talk to some indigenous cultures and say that forever it's been their thing, right? Living in harmony with reality and how the real world works. But yeah, that's quite mind-blowing all the way back in the 90s. And I can't help but get a sense of just a little bit of anger, I guess, there too, that those decisions were made back then, because we, in terms of the kind of the science around climate change, particularly in terms of running out of time, we're having to ask people to make massive changes quickly, and change takes time, and change is hard for people, and it's hard to even learn one new habit, be it less meat or driving less or whatever, and we're trying to get people to all that at once. Whereas if these decisions had been made, back in 1992, even back in like early 2000s, we would have so much more runway here, and we could do this so much more kind of gently, I guess. But those people back then, I don't know if it's a bit of an insight into the kind of American politics, right, and the influence of money in that whole system. Yeah. Anyway, okay, so what have I got here? What's one thing about what you're trying to achieve? So for you, it's around mindful money and changing where people invest their KiwiSaver. What's the one thing about what you're trying to achieve that really frustrates you?
Around the fact that it's often difficult for people to get out of their habitual patterns and think differently about things. It's it's like a lot of people care deeply about the environment, they care about nature and so on, but then for them to take the leap to say, okay, that should influence whether I drive my car. That should influence whether I eat meat. That should influence, things in my life, as you say. It should influence probably who I vote for. A few more people, maybe. It should influence who I buy stuff from. It should influence where I put my money. So, it's that connecting up the dots. That's what I find really frustrating. That for a lot of people, it's not that they don't care about the environment or care about society. It's they don't connect up the dots to say, okay, here's some of the things that are causing these problems.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was going to unpick some of that, but I'm also just conscious that we've got some questions that have come from the audience, and so I really want to, part of the reason we do these webinars, as I said, is so people have access to you and our experts as we go. So we've got one here from Jack. Hey, Jack. How do you treat something like Beyond Meats, which is GMO, but also has some moral merits?
I tend to be very suspicious of people using technologies like that to put food products together. So I'm a bit suspicious. I'd rather, if I don't want to eat meat, I'd rather eat vegetables, thanks, than something concocted in a laboratory.
I'm on the same thinking, and for me, it just links back a little bit to what you're just saying. It's kind of people not connecting the dots. People going, I want a meat burger. I want it to taste like meat. I want the blood to drip over my fingers. I want it should be meat, feel like all that. And well, okay, if you're going to eat meat, eat meat. Or if you're going to eat veggies, eat veggies. I don't see what, people wanting to try and lab create this meat-like substance out of all these GMO materials. It's just, I don't know, it's making something that's quite simple really complex, I think. Okay, we've got anonymous. I have a large lump of cash sitting in the bank. It's not from me, this question. I have a large lump of cash sitting in the bank waiting for a future investment in farmland. I would much prefer to get these funds away from traditional banking sector and into a fluid, ethical investment. Any suggestions?
There was one piece of that question that I missed. I'd like to get my money away from the system and
away from traditional banking sector and into
yeah.
a fluid, ethical investment. Do you want to just quickly maybe touch on what fluid means in the world of investing?
Yeah. So thanks for the question. The great that you got a large chunk of money in the bank. You know, lots of other people are probably listening to this saying,
anonymous, so
"Oh, how about so?" You mentioned farmland. There are ways that you can invest in farmland. There's investment houses like My Farm that have syndicated investments in things like horticulture and kiwi fruit orchards and things like that. So that's one way you can invest. You can invest more generally in shares, which aren't specifically in farmland, that are ethical. And there are kind of funds that you can do this that will do two things. One, they will be broad enough so that they cover a range of different companies. And that's kind of important because if you, as an individual investor, just invest in one or two companies, then there's a much higher likelihood that those companies will then go bust or get into problems. Right. If you invest in many companies, then any one of those companies going bust doesn't matter so much. It's the whole theory of diversification in finance. It's taken to a ridiculous extent sometimes, but actually the basic theory is kind of right, that actually you can protect yourself. But as long as you invest in good companies instead of in unethical companies. Yeah, and so there are funds that you can invest in to do that. They earn good returns, and over a period of time, that's a relatively low risk and stable way for you to be able to invest your money. And you know, there's stuff on KiwiSaver funds on Mindful Money, and in a month's time we'll have other managed funds on the Mindful Money platform as well.
Cool, fantastic. And I just wanted to touch on, I guess, the regenerative agriculture sort of conversation as well. And I know that there's a lot of people and farmers in New Zealand who are desperate to undertake, you know, farming in a way that sequesters carbon and restores soil and restores biodiversity, or what we collectively call farming regeneratively. And they don't have the money. They don't have the money in the bank to buy the plot of land. So, yeah, definitely, if we've got someone there who's got the money and wants to invest in land, and we've got people who want to work the land in a way that restores the environment and creates meaningful jobs and creates income, then it'd be great to try and connect them.
It would be, and that's where kind of in a way there's gaps in the system. The system isn't working well. So if you wanted to invest in regenerative agriculture as an individual, it's really hard to do. There's no kind of vehicles available for you to make those investments through the kind of, you know, the investment mechanism. And one of the things we want to do in Mindful Money is we want to initially set up a directory, and the directory is kind of where you can go in order to invest in companies that do good in society, so-called impact investing. So for investing for positive impact, because there are some good things happening, and some great companies out there that are doing really good things, that do need the money, but actually, you know, that information is not available to retail investors. You can't go along to a fund manager and say, I want to invest in those good companies over there, because there isn't the architecture yet. You haven't got the funds management structure to do that. And there are now, for the first time, a couple of impact funds, such as Nick, your friend Nick has set up one, and there's a few others, but they're generally only available to what's called wholesale investors. who have a
Yeah.
lot of money and a lot of experience. So for retail investors, members of the public, there aren't yet many options.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things we want to do to try and create some of those options and the information for people to be able to invest in good companies.
And then Barry, is that partly because of the investment world sort of trying to protect the retail investor so that they don't get fleeced of their money?
Yeah, it's also part of the regulatory system. It's very hard to set up a new fund. There are all sorts of regulatory hoops to go through, and so it's not easy. It will come. We will in New Zealand have those kind of funds that are available to the public. But you know what, the investment industry is sitting there saying, "Oh, we're not sure there's a real public demand out there for that stuff." You know, like they've been saying about ethical investment for years. You know, it's kind of, "Oh, we won't kind of go ethical because actually people don't care enough in order to be able to invest in it." And now those changes are happening, and people really do care enough, and they are making those conscious choices. And so the same thing will happen with companies doing things for good in society.
And is it the fund managers, are they just a bad bunch of people who sort of just don't care, or are they really kind of just bound by the economic system, or are they bound by their sort of legal requirements, or is it, what's kind of stifling it, I guess, from them, from their position? Like, why aren't we got more fund managers just going ahead and doing this stuff?
It's a separation of people's brains. That you take a financial decision. For most people, they think in terms of risk and return.
Yeah.
And this is whole theory in economics, in finance, the efficient market portfolio, and it's all about diversification. It's all about earning the greatest return and so on. And typically, what the company does and its impact on the environment and people never enters the equation. That's not relevant.
Yeah, right.
What's relevant is the kind of risk and return and the finance structuring and how much debt and how much equity, and all of that's very relevant. But the impact on the real world, that's not part of the equation. And so most of these people, when they're going through finance at university, that was what they learned about finance. And that's the way the financial system still operates in most of the world. That's really dominant.
Yeah.
And occasionally at the edges, you get a little bit of, well, you should take into account sort of some risks of climate change and some risks of, environmental liabilities and things like that. So that's the way the crack opens up.
Yeah.
But it opens up as financial risk. Still not impact on the ground. It's through financial risk.
Yes.
And so you're starting to see some changes in that industry, but it's still happening slowly. There are some great pioneers out there, absolutely fantastic people who are doing stuff differently and who are leading the way. But the mainstream of the industry is still back in the old stuff around it's finance that matters and impact is irrelevant.
Spreadsheets and graphs.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's that one. So we've got one here from Sam Tobin. Hi, Sam. With the
Hi, Sam.
objective of driving environmental policy change, how successful has the intertwining of green and social issues in the Green Party been, particularly during the 1999 to 2008 period?
Gosh, so how long you got?
Yeah. This is a 10-second question. No, you go. Have a go at that.
So as a former head of Oxfam, when I kind of became more active in the Greens and stood for the Greens, it was natural to me that sustainability would include people, would include social justice, would include human rights, would include sort of working on the causes of poverty, and as well as working on the environment and climate change and everything else. And the idea that you can kind of separate those out really didn't seem kind of sensible to me. And one of the reasons that I like the Green Party is that's the way the Green Party charter is written, there are still many people associated with the Green Party who say, well, you know, forget all that social stuff. Why don't you just work on the environment? You're called Greens after all. Why don't you just
Yeah,
eat the green? But actually, I think that misses the whole connection and sustainability. Because it is about people and the environment, and it is about how we live on this earth and how we care for each other, and so I don't agree with the attempts to separate that out, and I agree entirely with the kind of holistic way of looking at it, and I think that's, you know, despite some media commentators who wish it would be different, I think that's still very much at the heart of the Greens today.
Yeah. I think it just made me think again of your point about people not connecting the dots, right? People not being able to see how it all works together. We talk about with Go Well, you know, systems thinking and understanding how everything's intertwined.
And it's a lovely graphical portrayal of that from somebody I worked with at Oxfam, who then went off to write a book on what's called donut economics.
Oh, right.
Her name's Kate Rayworth, and Kate came over here to do the Readers and Writers Festival.
You're the one who brought her over.
No, I wish I had. But Kate's fabulous, and she's done so well in marrying the ecological limits that we have with the kind of human rights and the right to live a life of dignity and have people's basic needs taken care of. So that I'd encourage, if anyone hasn't turned on to Donut Economics, to go and check out Kate Rayworth's book and
it's a game changer. Wow.
And it's what she did so beautifully is put in a diagram. And she's very good at it. She says, I could talk all my life and get nowhere. Put in a diagram and people suddenly say, that's what you mean.
Exactly right.
Done that so well.
Oh, I totally agree. She talks about how the traditional, you know, finance world, economics world have all these graphs and diagrams, and they are so powerful. And it's this whole thing too around, it's one thing just sort of saying, you know, that's wrong, it's not working, it's broken, But if people don't have an alternative, they just like throw their hands up, like, well, what the hell am I supposed to do, you know? So she's done an amazing job of visually showing an alternative for us to shift to, and I think it's amazing. We use it a lot with all our clients. We introduce them to the donut economics, and it helps them sort of visualize, I guess, because sustainability is so broad, and it's a way of sort of bringing it into one place for them to kind of comprehend it all. Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Oh, if you ever get the chance to introduce me to Kate, please do.
She's great when she came out here, and she did a lot of stuff behind the scenes and talking to politicians and getting the word out, talking to lots of influential people, as well as talking to public audiences. And she's really good.
Yeah, oh, fantastic. Anonymous again. Hi, Barry. Any ideas for how to solve the measurement of impact problem? Some good tools and resources, IMP, GIIN, IRIS. Seems difficult as a lot of bias, proprietary data problems, who pays problems, and certain metric difficulties around environmental and social impact.
Hugely difficult. When you start trying to look at commercial activities creating public good in the world, the way you measure that, the way you define things, the way you can be precise enough about it is really difficult. And a lot of businesses now relate what they do to the Sustainable Development Goals in a very vague way. They say, well, we clean up our wastewater, therefore we're working on the Sustainable Development Goal that has something to do with fresh water, therefore we're doing good in the world. No, you're cleaning up your pollution. So I think that there needs to be a dose of realism around the stuff. And the reality is that real life impacts are really difficult to measure.
And subjective as well, right?
And they're very subjective. And we often have to kind of take a step back with a sort of common sense approach to say, before we get too technical about measurement systems, let's just make sure we've got the sort of chain of causality right. company does X, and then this produces a response of Y, and at the end of the day, we have somebody in an affordable house, for example. So what was it along the way? Did you build a house? What kind of finance structure did you set up to make that affordable? What do you mean by affordable? Who went into the house? It's kind of, it needs measurement systems, but it also needs credibility and common sense. Ideally, we're going to have certification systems that's set up to be able to measure this and certify it. Until you can certify it, people aren't going to believe the measurement that companies do themselves of their impact. And so that's the next move, I think, for the impact world, is to make sure that there are credible forms of certification, tracing, and labeling. And I spent a lot of my life kind of setting up systems like the fair trade system. And from the early days.
You involved with that?
Yeah, that was one of the things I did in the UK and then in New Zealand and Australia, and not solely, it's kind of as a contributor with a cast of millions, but it is that kind of credibility that you need for an impact system to work. So I think having that architecture right is ultimately going to be more important than the precise measurement tools.
Yeah. I've got another question here from Sam. What effect do you think coming, probably out of recession, have on ethical investing and corporate behaviours, and how outcomes can be encouraged? So impact of COVID really and the recession on ethical investing.
Yeah, I mean, one really interesting thing was, after COVID hit, we wondered how the ethical investing companies were doing. So we went out and we did an analysis, and it showed that the ethical companies on the Mindful Money platform significantly outperformed the average for KiwiSaver.
Really? And
that was echoed in international data showing it as well. And it showed that they were much more resilient during a downturn. So there's some stuff on that on our website. Yeah, so some of the other changes, unfortunately, people have had a lot to think about during COVID-19, and they haven't thought enough about their ethical funds. So we haven't had quite as many visitors to the Mindful Money website as we had hoped. We're on a nice growth curve, and
because you've got big goals for this year, don't you, in terms of getting people across?
We do. Yeah, we're trying to shift $50 million into ethical funds.
Do it. We'll do our bit to help, Barry. We will be doing our bit to help. Okay, Barry, I'm just noticed time as well. So, thank you. I just had to get my battery plugged in as well by my very kind helper. I've just got our word association game that I warned you about. So, bit of fun. We'll see how this goes. So I'm gonna say a word to you, or a couple of words, and you've got to say the first word that comes into your head. If you don't want to give an answer, you can just say pass. I will judge you if you say pass. But anyway, you can say pass, all right?
And do you have one of these buttons so you can kind of delete it if I say anything to...
Oh, yeah. Oh, wow. Well, I don't think the audience here matters too much.
It's a family show, right?
Exactly. It's past 8 o'clock now, so...
All right.
Okay, here we go. Fossil fuels.
Exxon.
Donald Trump.
Idiot.
You did well there. Good restraint. Religion.
Oh gosh. Important.
Important. Yeah, agreed. Drugs.
Not now, thanks.
I thought you might say important again. Politics.
Messy.
New Zealand.
Fantastic.
COVID-19.
Surprising.
Sustainability.
Potential.
2 to go. Investing.
Ethical.
Mindful money. You've already said ethical.
How should I say? Impactful.
Nice. Thank you. That was great. That went well. It's interesting, isn't it? Like, people's sort of associations with different things, which, maybe we'll unpick those in the psychology of that another time.
Don't get me started on Trump, whatever you
Yeah.
do.
Oh, I swing between
gets,
feeling really sorry for the guy and just really,
he gets too much airtime already.
Oh, yeah. That's just mind blowing what's going on there. Okay, just quickly looking at our thing, if there's anything else that we really are. The other question I do like to just ask people about, is there a piece of recent technology, maybe the last 5 years or so, that you're really excited about?
I'll go back a bit further and say solar photovoltaic.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, what a game changer, really.
Yeah.
To be able to utilize sunlight in order to drive energy in our world. You know, hey, this is huge. We've got a long way to go with it.
Yeah. Do you foresee a network of sort of community set up?
It's a democratized form of energy. There's so many ramifications to it. It's just going to happen for a long time.
Yeah. Two more questions. What's something that you've changed or given up in your own life that you've found really hard to do?
Flying.
Yeah. So you don't fly at all?
Well, I try not to. For years, kind of, when I was working for Oxfam and when I was living overseas, I did a lot of work in sub-Saharan Africa and in Asia and other countries. I traveled a lot and often, talking about climate change and trying to because I went to climate change negotiations around the world as kind of part of Oxfam's negotiating influence team and did lots of work on globalization and other issues. But over the last few years, it's not just the flight shaming movement. I just don't feel right for flying. And I'm someone who loves other cultures and other places and, going to do interesting things in different parts of the world. But I'm just finding it harder and harder to justify hopping onto an airplane, and I can't wait till they start using biofuels, which will, it's not the whole answer, but it'll help.
Yeah, I share your pain. I guess I too have been very privileged to travel and spent 4.5 years living in London and did all the travel we do there and went through Southeast Asia and Central America. And I wouldn't be the person I am if I hadn't traveled. I wouldn't be in sustainability, that's for sure. I've seen the environmental, degradation that we're causing around the world, and I've seen the just massive inequalities around the world, and it really has impacted me to want to try and use my time on this planet to try and solve those issues, right? So it's really hard because I sort of feel like, everybody should go and see other parts of the world and see how other cultures work and see how other cultures and other populations solve different problems and their customs, and it's just so enriching. But just bloody burns fossil fuels to get there. So I really feel your pain on that one. And then the last one I'm going to ask you is, who is someone that you really admire and why?
Somebody I worked with a lot after the Earth Summit on kind of sustainability is Jonathan Porritt. And he's been an environmentalist, head of Friends, founder of Friends of the Earth and other organizations. He's an author, just coming out with another book soon. He's done a lot of work in New Zealand. His father was once Governor General here. But through it all, and he's someone who has worked in corporate boardrooms, has been hugely influential. He was chair of the Climate Commission in the UK for many years. But through it all, he's had huge amount of integrity in what he does on the environment and sending an uncompromising message. And he did an event for Mindful Money in New Zealand with a bunch of sustainability managers, and basically berated them for saying, you guys, you're all kind of not going to the core of the issue with the companies. Yeah. And it was a lot of integrity. Now Jonathan's written a book which is about to come out. It traces his evolution to say, I'm going to stop going to the corporate boardrooms and I'm going to join the protesters on extreme rebellion, and I'm going to become an activist all over again, because we're running out of time, and we need to shake up the system. And so I think he's a completely remarkable person.
Jonathan
Porritt.
P-O
R-R-I-T-T.
And do you know the name of his book?
Oh God. No, because it hasn't been published yet. Okay. But the last one,
people maybe
you got around and get it from my bookshop.
If people maybe Google
Sir Jonathan Porritt, and you'll find it.
Thank you so much. I will look him up.
Yeah, he's well worthwhile, and kind of for a lot of people in the environmental movement and sustainability movement, he's been a real icon, and awesome, great work.
Okay, I hate to bring this to an end, but I'm just going to share, as we wrap up, a poll for everyone. So there's 4 questions there, so I'm just going to launch that now. Allow panelists to vote. Yes, I'll let you vote as well, Barry.
Thank you.
So if everybody wants to have a look at that poll and see if they've heard of Mindful Money before this webinar. Before this webinar, had you used the Mindful Money tool? Doesn't matter to you where your KiwiSaver money is invested. Do you think that investing in business with a big focus on delivering positive social and environmental impacts will mean you get a higher or lower investment return? So yeah, I should have maybe asked them at the start, Barry, before you led the witness a bit here, but thank you all to those who voted and who have come along. Sorry I didn't get to everyone's questions. That's the joy of running these things. You put yourself out there, but you get to ask the questions really. So there's a few that we missed. Sam, I saw you had a couple more, and a couple more from Anonymous, but hopefully maybe we'll get those to Barry at another time.
If anyone wants to email me, Barry at mindfulmoney.nz, do so.
Cool. And we'll share this link up on our website again, gowellconsulting.co.nz, for people to watch or listen. They can just listen to it as well. And we'll share the link with Barry to share as well. Anything? What about on social media, Barry? I know Mindful Money are on Instagram.
Yeah, we're on social. We're on Twitter at Mindful Money. We're on Mindful Money NZ. We're on Facebook, Mindful Money Movement NZ, LinkedIn. Mainly is through my page on LinkedIn, and we're on Instagram, but don't ask me what the address is.
I think it might just be at Mindful Money.
I think it is.
As we're closing up here, I'm just getting some messages from Nonta. Thank you, Nonta, who's in the background keeping everything running smoothly. She said the book by Sir Jonathan Porritt is Seeing Green.
Yep.
From 1984, I think.
That's one of them. And then the recent one is The World as Something or Other, Peter or Jonathan. I just went over to my bookcase and I can't find it. But the recent one's a really interesting one. It's kind of imagining a world as if we'd made some of the changes that we need to make.
Yeah, made some of those decisions.
Really good. Yeah.
Well, thank you, and to everyone who's listening as well. Thank you so much. There is at the end when this closes down. Hopefully, if it all works, when we shut this down, you'll get a link to a little survey. It's got like another 5 questions about how the webinar went and if you liked it or not, and if you enjoyed Barry or not. So your feedback's really helpful. I've already had someone say mention your shirt, Barry. Really enjoyed your shirt.
It's got 2 E's on it. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Hey, well, thank you so much, mate. Really appreciate you making the time on your Tuesday evening. And thank you for all the work you're doing. I didn't know you had such a impactful CV, and I feel even more inspired than I already was by the work you're doing, mate. So thank you for being an inspiration, and thank you for all the work you're doing. Yeah, people who have been listening in, hopefully you have already changed your KiwiSaver, but if you haven't, go into Mindful Menu, look it up, and yeah, see that your KiwiSaver is invested in your values and your principles. Yeah. Any final words, Barry?
www.mindfulmoney.nz if anyone needs to look it up.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you so
Cool.
much.
Thank
Take
you
care,
for
everybody.
having me on, Nick.
Thanks so much. Cheers.
See
Bye.
ya.